We're going to talk a little bit more about the Renaissance, but we're going to shift gears to some sacred music. One of the things I want you to know about the Renaissance is that the Renaissance period was a period of time where there was a lot of interest in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and that really influenced art at the time, but it also influenced the way they looked at education, the way they looked at politics, different other human issues, how they viewed the world. So the worldview shifted to humanism during the Renaissance period. What that means is they looked less towards their spiritual uh, tendencies to define their lives, and they wanted more specific things like reason. Show me, prove it to me. They wanted scientific discoveries. And so there was a lot of developments in science, there's a lot of developments within philosophy, and human issues became really at the core of their thoughts. The individual rather than group mentality was an encouraged line of thinking. So they wanted to see the world ordered more rationally. And so just having this, the church tells you what to do, was not enough for them. Okay, so just give you a little bit of background. But let's look at the music of the church and what changed during the Renaissance. So during the previous era, we had Gregorian chant, then we had organum. Polyphony became very popular, and so it was complex polyphony, but it did not have this blending quality to it because you have different parts singing different melodies at the same time, almost in competition with each other, that polyphonic music. So the hymns and the different worship music songs, works, whatever you want to call them, really changed in the Renaissance. They started looking more at how they functioned together, how they blended together. And so you would have either these hymns or motets, which we're going to talk about, and the different polyphonic settings of the Mass, which was still obviously being written, changing its style. One of the common things was still to hear these professional male singers. They would have gone into choir schools in the cathedrals like St. Mark's. We talked about that, or Notre Dame. They would have been trained from childhood. So these were professional singers that knew nothing else besides singing. The early works in the Renaissance were based on something called a cantus firmus. That's a fancy way of saying it's a pre-existing melody, most likely similar to or an existing Gregorian chant. And so they took this old melody, for lack of a better word, and they based a song on it. That became the cantus firmus. Um, I think you could even translate that something like firmus. I look at that as strong, a strong chant. Okay, so this is that base chant that the whole song is written on top of. Remember, we're still thinking about a cappella being the main style of music, just like it was with the madrigal. A cappella was still the main style within the church as well. But this polyphony that became popular in the Renaissance was based on imitation. So the voices imitating each other, more similar. And so you're going to have this combination of, yes, there's some individual action, but there's also a collective or collaborative style in the worship. More harmony. You're going to have more blending that might sound to us a little bit more palatable, what we're used to with chords. So the sounds are less dissonance and more consonance, but they still use dissonance. All music is going to use dissonance, but it's in a more controlled way. So while the cantus firmus is doing its thing, that pre-existing kind of melody, it's not, I say it's bass, but it's not like low bass necessarily, but that steady melody. And then the other voices, we're going to be doing lots of ornamentation, virtuoso style singing on top of it. Less of a lack of meter and more focus on, you're going to hear more duple meter. And just to give you an idea of art at the time, this is very famous. Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. I know you've seen it before, but the person that we're going to look at that wrote this motet that we're going to cover in a minute here was a contemporary of Leonardo da Vinci. So when you look at artwork from this time period, which is very famous, Renaissance art, you can see the humanism is in it. They're trying to depict real life. It's less about gold and flashy and these halos around. If you look at this art, you've got on the left-hand side a medieval depiction of the Virgin Mary. And on the right, you've got a Renaissance depiction of the Virgin Mary. Very, very different, okay? The gold halos, it's very much not humanistic, whereas on the right, the Renaissance, much more relationally driven, much more realistic. And so that gives you a quick look into the change from medieval to Renaissance. All right, Josquin de Prez is the person we're going to look at with this motet. A motet is different than a madrigal. Madrigal is secular, motet is sacred. The motet is different than the mass. The mass is also sacred, but the motet in the Renaissance was a sacred vocal work other than the mass, okay? It was a Latin text, just like the mass was, but it was not part of the mass. So this would have been other sections of used in church services and religious services. One of the very popular ones was Praise of the Virgin Mary, and they might have taken a prescribed prayer but added newly written text. Okay, remember the Mass had a lot of set liturgy, so a lot of set texts that were the same every time. The motet, you had newly written texts, so it gave composers a chance to do something with new material. And so Josquin de Prez was a very prominent composer in the early Renaissance and very powerful influence on following generations. There's a little sketch of him, interesting hat there. He kind of worked all over in Europe, Italy, France, Milan, Ferrara, also choir in Rome, and he ended up going back to French. You can see by his name that he was French. So he has a lot of the Italian Renaissance influence, but also the French influence as well. You're going to hear humanism. That's the focus of the Renaissance. You're going to hear expressive harmony. You're going to hear melodies that are more pleasing, softer sounding. You're going to hear music that's more rich. All right, he had a lot of output. Look, over 100 motets, 17 masses, and then also French chansons and some secular songs as well. But the piece that you're going to listen to is Ave Maria. Remember, we said that was a very popular praise of the Virgin Mary. Ave Maria Virgo Serena. Hail Mary, Gentle Virgin. This was written in the 1480s. It's for 4 voices. It's an a cappella piece, no instruments. Latin words. This is for a choir, not soloists, but a choir. You're going to hear strophic and rhymed text. And the sectional form of it is going to be following the poetry. So when you look at the translations, you'll see how it's set musically. It follows the words. You're going to have that reference to that cantus firmus, or that pre-existing chant. You're going to hear imitative polyphony. Remember, polyphony was in less competition now and started being more imitative as they moved towards more homophonic and homorhythm sounds. Okay, so you're going to hear more conjunct sounds in music rather than disjunct. Lots of different voice combinations to listen for, frequent changes in the voice groupings. Sometimes you're going to have smaller groups, larger groups, but there's more interdependence and equality between the different voices. Not one or two being more important than the others, but they're all focusing like we would think of as a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, all very important to the ensemble. So here's the listening guide. Follow along. You can see the text in here. And I want you to be listening for the different meters, the way the consonants is there versus a lot of dissonance. See if you can hear that it's 4 parts, a cappella, and listen to the expression at the very end. Mother of God, remember me. Okay? Thank you.